I'm sure you could tell by today's title that this topic that I'm going to be discussing today probably deserves a trigger warning, and there are some people watching or listening that will probably be uncomfortable or, triggered by the conversation today. So if that might be you, please proceed with caution. But if you're ready to understand the neuroscience behind fetishes, then this video is for you. So, if you don't know who I am, my name is Wendy. I'm an orgasm and neuro-pleasure coach. And I was inspired for today's video by listening to a podcast on the Rick Rubin's podcast, Tetragrammaton. I will put the link into it in the show notes. It was a conversation between Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Jack Kruse. Now, I love all the neuroscience stuff and was inspired by Jack Kruse many years ago when I heard him on a podcast talking about light. So I've always been paying attention to him. And because I love neuroscience, of course, I've been listening to Andrew Huberman. So when I heard about this podcast, I finally set aside the 7 hours to be able to listen to it. And it's taken me a long time to get through it. But at the very end of part one of this two-part series, they brought up something and I was like, oh my God, I completely disagree with them. So basically the whole podcast, I'm agreeing, nodding along and going, yeah, that sounds right. And for the things I don't know, I'm assuming that they know. But when they started talking about fetishes, it sent off a whole bunch of like warning, warning, warning signs in my brain. And I knew that I had to speak up and talk about it. So what I am here to talk about today is actually how fetishes are established. Now, this is the theory of mine. I've done my best to actually try to disprove my theory, and I have yet to come across this research to actually disprove it. The funny thing is that it relies on a lot of the research and conversations that I've seen on podcasts and read and all around from Dr. Huberman, ironically. It didn't rely just on that. I used to work at a dungeon. All right, side note, if you don't know what a dungeon is a place where adults can explore their sexual preferences, kinks, and fantasies in a safe, consensual setting. The one I worked for was a legal one, so no exchange of bodily fluids or penetration was allowed. It was really about exploring these parts of ourselves that maybe you didn't have a safe place to explore. All right, so now back over to understanding what fetishes are. Because I worked there, I had this unique opportunity to do some undercover research, right? So I had a whole bunch of people to talk to. I mean, I didn't talk to everybody, but I sometimes when the opportunity would come up, I would definitely go in and start asking them questions about where these fetishes came from and if they even knew. Now, by the time I started asking these questions, I really had developed this theory and kind of already knew what I was, kind of looking for and what kind of questions to ask. So it wasn't just like some random dude knew exactly how this happened. And then I discovered how, fetishes are made. This really was after some pretty deep, thorough research and understanding of the nervous system, and in particular in brain development and how the brain is developing in the different phases and all that. All right. So that's the background of that. Oh, yeah. And also, did I mention that I have a very active life? And so I've done a lot of other research and questions and studies over in my active life and also confirming that too. So between those two places, I had a lot of people to talk to and a lot of opportunities to explore this. Now, let me tell you my theory, and then I'm going to tell you the science behind it, because I think it'll make a little bit more sense. Because if I just jump into the science, you're not going to know how it all Mitch, Mitch, how it all matches together. All right. So I'm going to use an example. I'm going to use two examples of two people that I know and actually had this conversation with. And then I'll kind of expand and explore the science as I go with it. Client number one, he actually did remember he was pretty certain that he knew exactly where his fetish stemmed from. So he had a foot fetish, and in particular, a foot fetish with nylons. So he loved women wearing nylons, and that was his thing. And yeah. Oh, wait, that reminds me. I should probably explain what a fetish is, because sometimes you hear the word kink and sometimes you hear the word fetish. So I want to make sure that you understand that pretty clearly. So there is an article that I'm going to reference in this description here that explains it much better than what I'm going to be saying right now. But basically, A kink is something that you like to have, whereas a fetish is something that you kind of need to have. We're talking about sexual pleasure here. So basically, a kink is something that you like. Maybe it turns you on, but you don't always need to have it in order for you to get aroused. Whereas a fetish is really more like one of those things that you kind of really need to keep exploring in order to truly get aroused. That's really the difference between kink and fetish, at least from the definitions that I use. All right. So back over to my story. This guy had a fetish with the nylons and in the feet. He was really good at always being able to get the feet in, but one of his complaints is that younger women that he was typically dating never liked to wear pantyhose anymore. And that's one of the reasons why he used to go visit us over in the dungeon, is because we would happily oblige and wear pantyhose, and he could then see them on our feet. As I said, he kind of knows where it came from. He was like a really good test person at the beginning to try to figure this all out. One day, when after a session, and we were just chit chatting, and by the way, I didn't always chit chat with all my clients, but this one I did happen to. I had some that I did. Anyways, we were chit chatting as we were cleaning up and putting things away, and just by any chance, do you know kind of like where this all started? And he's like, oh, I remember it exactly. This memory's come back to me so many times that I know this is where it comes from. He's like, I was a really little kid, and my mom had some friends over, and so this is an older guy. So like back in the day, like in the 50s, 60s, 40s, I'm not even sure exactly how old and how old his mom was and exactly when this all happened. But a long time ago, women used to wear pantyhose a lot. His mom had a whole bunch of her friends over, and they were playing cards at the kitchen table, and he was crawling around underneath the kitchen table. Now they had all taken off their shoes, so they're all just sitting around with their feet in the pantyhose. And as he would move around the table underneath there, they would all tickle him with their feet. And he remembered just having the absolute best time laughing underneath the table. And then his mom reached down, pulled him up, and gave him a big hug. And all the women like oohed and awed and cooed all over him, like, oh, you're so cute and sweet and funny and all that. He knows for certain that that is where it comes from. So that is tied to my theory. My theory is that, and as I said, I'll explain the science behind this, is that you have an event or events that happen when you are in your really, really early childhood, most likely while your sensory motor networks are really coming onto play. So if you know anything about brain development from the age of 0 to 2, this is all when sensory motor is really, really active and your brain is making all these really deep connections. So this ties in pretty closely to with this guy, where he remembers this particular memory because he was crawling around. He was really, really young. He knows he wasn't older based on like the where they were living. And so it kind of fits in with that whole sensory, motor development phase around 0 to 2. And let's be honest, most adults don't remember very many memories under the age of 5 anyway. So even if it was a little bit older, it still fits in with this whole thing. So he has this memory. It's full of all this love, happy joy, yummy, 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 yummy. And so he associates feet and stockings with humpy, happy, yummy, yummy. But then how does it become a fetish? Well, in our little discussion there, I started asking him some questions. Now, one of the things I've learned through my whole research and understanding of how the brain works is that when we kind of make memories, so at night when we go to sleep, there's this process called sleep spindles, where basically these are my words, not exactly scientific words, it's how I interpret the data. There's like an emotional body snapshot where like the whole entire physical state of the body is paired with a memory. And those kind of go together. They get filed into the file cabinet of our mind. And then anytime we're triggered, that file comes out, gets whatever the events were of the day that re-triggered it. It kind of takes that, pairs it up with the new information that you have, and puts it back away and files it back away. And it keeps doing this process as long as you're triggered. If you never really get triggered from the memory, it doesn't really come out anymore. And maybe it stays pretty much the same. But the more you get triggered, the more this memory shifts and change. And we see evidence of this all the time. Ever seen a fisherman talk about the fish that they caught? When they first caught it, it was this big. And then the next time they tell it's this big. And the next time it's this big. And the next time it's this big. You get the picture, right? We keep repackaging our memories. And so the facts of our memories actually start to change and shift every single time we go to sleep. Back to my story with my client. He had this experience. And then as he moved through puberty, he didn't remember this until we had a discussion. So I had asked him about it before, asked him about it. He couldn't remember. But then when I saw him again, he's like, I remember what happened. And so he actually confirmed it. It was pretty cool. So what I know to happen, just understanding the developmental biology, is that when you go through puberty, there's these different things that happen and hormones are all created. And sometimes you get turned on at like a breeze going by, right? It could be anything that triggers it, and it's not necessarily like the physical body. It could actually be the memory, but you could also be getting triggered, but also having the hormones running through your body and having this process happening in your body with these memories. And so this is actually what he kind of remembered happening. There was a situation when he was a teen where it was completely innocuous. It wasn't anything sexual. It wasn't anything with his mom either. It was just this random person. And because the hormones were running through his body, he noticed he got turned on and was like, "Oh, oh," and he tried to like hide it and, do what most little boys do and pretend everything's okay. The reason this is all important is that, remember, it's that memory and emotion. So it's the body snapshot and that memory snapshot that the events of the day just trigger it, right? So now that he got aroused when that happened, when he goes to sleep, that when your brain repackages it, it takes that emotional body state that he now is experiencing, that turned on arousal state, and is matching it up with that memory. Now, as I said, this guy actually remembered it, but most people are not remembering these memories. They're just creating these snapshots and not actually knowing why. Now, he didn't wake up the next day and all of a sudden have the foot fetish that he does today, right? This kind of happened over time. Every time you get triggered, he'd have a new thought. I mean, this happens. This is the way we learn for the most part. We don't usually get these concepts on the very first time we hear something. It usually we hear something, it has to be said a different way and a different way and a different way. I mean, even taking the episode or the podcast episode with Rick Rubin and Jack Kruse and Andrew Huberman, it took Jack Kruse saying the same kind of things over and over again. And then eventually Dr. Huberman was like, oh, wait, I get it. Even though Mr. Kruse kind of said the same exact thing at the beginning. It just took this time and this evolution and the thought process to kind of come together before it actually makes any sense in your head. Now, since we're talking about, the sexual arousal in younger guys, most likely if they're not thinking about it in the moment, it's going to be later on when they're alone, when they feel safe enough to be able to have these different thoughts. Now, sad part is, and the reason why I'm doing this video, and I think it's really important that people know, most of the time when these thoughts start coming up, they are associated with shame and guilt. Now, the thing about it is that it was that high emotional state as a child that created this intense memory, which makes the neural pathways very intense. It is now this additional shame and guilt that is going to keep continuing to strengthen these neural pathways of this fetish. As they keep growing and they keep developing, that fetish gets stronger and stronger and develops more and more every single time they think about it. And if they've got some shame and guilt attached to it, it's going to make it deeper and stronger. So some of those fetishes that maybe are not accepted by society become even deeper and even more entrenched in the brain in the way that they feel about it and they think about it. And it gets harder and harder actually to change it if they so desire. Now, I will say, for the most part, fetishes really, the 90% of fetishes, they really do no harm to anybody else, right? Yes, there are some fetishes that maybe feel a little weird and inappropriate, which actually brings me to a point that actually Dr. Huberman made on a podcast I was listening today that he just released this week, where he was talking about task switching in the brain. He was talking about the prefrontal cortex and how the prefrontal cortex is responsible for the task switching. And the main part about it is about understanding the context and also the appropriateness of the behavior or the task that you're doing. Now, if you know anything about developmental biology and the prefrontal cortex, which Jack Kruse actually happened to mention on the podcast, so it's really funny. You can see how this is all inspired for me to talk about it. The prefrontal cortex does not fully develop until you're about the age of 25. Now, the prefrontal cortex, that very area that Dr. Huberman is talking about on his podcast about understanding context and appropriateness, is the area that gets developed last. And it's not till around the age of 25. And that's when the myelination comes on around the nerves. And so basically what's happening before that, the brain is really plastic there. And so these behaviors and thoughts that are getting ingrained because of the emotional intensity, which, by the way, I mentioned emotional intensity. If you know how neurons are created, it has to do with acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is released anytime there's heightened emotions. So as you keep developing, having these heightened emotional states, you're strengthening the neural pathways, you're making them deeper connection. And then if you happen to be a kid while you're doing this, you don't have the fully developed prefrontal cortex to apply the proper context and appropriate the context and appropriate part of it. I don't even know how to say this correctly, to that actual thought. So it keeps kind of repeating the cycle of shame and guilt, but still strengthening that actual fetish. Now, another side note to point out here is that fetishes have a tendency to occur in males more than females. And the reason is, if you understand the arousal process, part of the male arousal process involves the parietal lobe, right? Which is object recognition. So it's not surprising that part of the arousal process is this object recognition, AKA the foot in the pantyhose, and that it's solidified during the hormone crazy stage of your teenage years and keeps getting more and more entrenched and then really fully solidified around the age of 25 when the prefrontal cortex is finishing developing. But now at the age of 25, you realize that maybe your fetish is not accepted by society and therefore you're really experiencing shame and guilt and you're furthering, strengthening that fetish regardless of the age that you're at. The key takeaway here is that if you or anyone you know has a fetish that you maybe think is not appropriate, just know that it's most likely founded on a memory, an experience that happened before they were even aware, and it just was a random thing of events that led it to happen to become a fetish. And it is nothing that they're doing. They're not deviants. It is literally just biology working in the way that it's meant to work. And it is that compassion that we need to take into this world. So I hope you learned a little bit about fetishes and they're a little bit more demystified for you. And you can go on. And if it's you, you can go explore it safely. And I do want to say, if you do have a fetish that you don't like, maybe it is one of those that is not maybe accepted by society. There are ways to go about changing your neural pathways in your brain. And one of the ways that it starts with is developing compassion and understanding for yourself. It is safety that is required in order for you actually to create new neural pathways and new behaviors. So go on, go explore those kinks and fetishes. Do not feel guilty or shameful about it, but also simultaneously, if you want to do something about it, there are opportunities and ways and pathways for you to do that. All right. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. So I ended the video and realized that I forgot to talk about a couple things here. Forgot to mention the second example, and I forgot to mention the other emotions. In my second example, it's a tickling example. Guy number two was younger. He had this uncle that was really elusive. Like, for the most part, he'd be like, yeah, kid, go over there. He was not very affectionate at all. He was just gruff and grumbly. But when it came time to it, sometimes they would get into these tickle fights and his uncle would tickle him until like he would just be like tapping out and could not stop and could not handle it anymore. Now, the thing about it, guy number two, he actually did not remember this really until much later when we were talking about. I mean, kind of knew that maybe that might have an idea with it, but as I said, it was through our conversations. So guy number two remembers the moment where the tickling that he liked it as a kid really started becoming associated with arousal. And it was a non-sexual event. It was a bunch of friends, you know, tweenish years. So the hormones were starting to shift now, but it was really innocent. It was guys and girls, and they were all just like, being kids, running around, tickling, and they were tickling each other. And he had a moment where he got aroused while he was tickling a girl, and he was like, oops. And he was like, felt really embarrassed, and he stopped and he pulled away, and he like, I hope she didn't notice, because we had talked about this when he, kind of remembered it. And you can start seeing, once again, shame, guilt. Oh, that was inappropriate. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. And let's face it too, like most people are not talking what's appropriate sexual fantasies and sexual arousal, objects and kinks and all of that stuff. You don't learn about that until much later. So as a teenager, pretty much anything that's not within the norm of film and TV and what you see, like, you're going to feel like you're the weird one and that no one else has these thoughts, right? And so he kept it to himself, kept them to himself. And so he started, but over time, he definitely started developing that tickle fetish. What's really important to note is, yes, these two examples are with happy memories, but I do have a client that I'm not going to mention, and I'm not even going to mention the story because it's going to be just really disturbing for some people. But I can tell you that once we started working together and pieced together some of these memories, he realized that his fetish that he was utterly ashamed of and never told anybody about until he started talking to me about it, and really carried around this like burden and shame and guilt, actually came from these really innocuous events in his life that were just circumstantial. It just happened to be this is the way his body adapted to those moments and those circumstances. We worked together and he was able to kind of shift that. And honestly, once that guilt started kind of leaving him, that intense desire started subsiding, because once again, it's in that creating safety that the changes can be made. So the thing about emotions, if you look into, whether you look into ancient Chinese medicine or psychology or whatever, there's basic emotions. So there's the happy one. Yes, we all know the happy one, but there's also sadness, there's anger, there's disgust. And so that the disgust one actually ties into what Dr. Huberman and Dr. Kruse were talking about on the podcast. They mentioned some things about, or Dr. Huberman said, yeah, it's something where people feel disgusted by it. Well, that's just a really intense emotion. So using this whole understanding this process, like there was something that probably happened when they were little that disgusted them or angered them, or you made them happy or sad or whatever the different emotions are, but any heightened emotional state, then they had a triggering event that maybe brought up that memory, maybe not to consciousness, but to the subconscious level. And if you've done any work with understanding how like the conscious and subconscious mind work, there are memories that we have that we cannot bring to the surface all the time because they're not really needed to bring to the surface in order for them to impact our behavior. All done super, super quick on a subconscious level is what helps us be able to like drive a car, ride a bike, read a book, listen to this podcast. Like all the activities that we do basically in life kind of rely on this mechanism of having all of these underlying memories that we rely on to kind of create our behavior patterns. It's no different with arousal. It's just behavior patterns that were established usually by the time you were younger. And so now, once again, just like behavioral patterns that you can develop when you're a kid, low attachment theory, anyone anxious attached like I am, actually, I used to be fearful avoidant, now just anxiously attached. But anyways, you can change your behavioral patterns. You can totally get rid of or shift any of the thoughts that you want to have, but it does require safety. It does require having compassion with yourself. It does require understanding. And it is that is the foundation of making these changes, these neurobiological changes in your body and in your mind. So I think that was it. Now, if anyone watching this little video here or listening to the podcast knows Dr. Andrew Huberman and wants to pass this along, I'd love to get his feedback. And not just his, I'd love to get your feedback too. What do you think about this? Like, do you know anyone with a fetish? Do you have a fetish? You don't have to say it. But let's just pretend it's all a friend of mine, right? We all have a friend who has a fetish, whether or not they're telling you about it. There are lots and lots of people have fetishes. So what do you think about this? Does this make sense based on what you know about brain development, what you understand about creating new neural pathways? What do you know about the arousal process? All of that. Like, does this make sense to you? Or is there something that I'm missing in this theory that completely disproves what I've just said? Love to know. Leave a comment. All right. Bye.